In this video, I'm going to show you how to build this fun and minimal notes application using the React JavaScript framework. I'm going to take you step by step, starting from generating the project using Create React App, to adding a router to support multiple screens for your app, to writing all the logic required to build this application. You're going to learn how to render lists, filter those lists, how to create forms, how to handle events, and much more. To top it all off, we'll take a look at how to build a demo REST API and how to use that REST API in your application so that all of our notes are saved even after we refresh the page. If you're just getting started with React and you want to build something practical, this video is for you. So sit back, maybe grab a cup of coffee and watch me as I build this whole application from start to finish. I'm going to start by generating a brand new React project, and for that I'm going to use npx and create React app, React notes. So this is going to go ahead and install all our dependencies for the project and set up our directory structure and also set up our development environment. Alright, so that's all done now. We can cd into that project and run npm start. But before actually running that, I'm just going to open this up in my editor. Okay, so once this folder is opened up, I can just close the other window and then I will run npm start. That will just start the development server. Okay, and you can see the default page. Okay, so I know that for this application, I'm going to need React router. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and Google create React app with router. So if I open up the create React app website, they tell you how to install it. You simply install this package, React router DOM. I'm going to close this window. Okay, so I'm going to open up a new terminal and just run that command. That will install React router DOM. And if you open up the basic example, you can see that it's pretty basic. It gives you these 3 routes and you can cycle through them, and each of those routes is actually a functional component. I'm just going to copy everything and head on back over here, and then I'm going to open up the source app.js directory and I'm going to replace everything that's here with that example. Okay, let's save that. And okay, so it's done installing the package. So if I refresh the page, you can see we get the default. Okay, so let's go ahead and make some modifications. First of all, I'm going to get rid of these comments because we don't need that. Then I'm going to come down here. We don't need this navigation up here, so I'm going to get rid of that as well. This HR, we don't need that. And for this div, I'm going to change the div to this empty syntax, this empty tag syntax, which you can use if you don't want to wrap everything around a div. And finally, I'm just going to get rid of all these routes except for the home route. And I don't want to do it like so. So instead we're going to use a different syntax, and I'm going to get rid of this closing route tag and close it here, and then say component, and then the component, like so. Okay, so that makes all these components redundant. Get rid of these, and if you say home page, like so, you can see that it works. Alright, so now also let's get rid of this comment as well. So you can see everything is pretty simple. We have a router, and when the router matches this /path, it loads this home component. So now I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to get rid of this home component as well. So I know my home page is going to be a list of notes. So I'm going to create a new component here. In the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder called pages. And inside these pages, I'm going to create a new file. And this is going to be called notes.js, and I'm going to use a snippet here, RCC, that just means React class component, and I'm going to put a link to this VS Code package in the description so you can get it as well. But basically it'll generate a class-based component for me, and you can see it's pretty basic. It just imports React and then exports a simple class called notes inside a div. Alright, it exports a simple class called notes, and then the render method simply has a single div. So in here we can just say notes here just as a placeholder, and then I'm going to switch back to the app.js file and then import that component up here. So import notes from, and I know it's in pages and notes. So instead of using this home here, which doesn't exist anymore, I'm going to use the notes. Okay, so let's refresh page and you can see it says notes here. Okay, so now it's time to go ahead and copy our template. Before copying the HTML, I'm going to go ahead and copy the styles. So let's go ahead and let's open up the repository. And I'm going to open up the distribution folder and CSS, compile.css, and then open up the raw file and copy all the CSS. And if you head on over back to our editor, you can see that if you open up the sidebar, there's this index.js file, and that index.js is the entry point of our application, and it is importing this index.css. If you open that up, it's just some rudimentary base styles for our body. So what we're going to do is get rid of everything here and paste our CSS here. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh the page. You can see nothing happens, but that's because we don't have any HTML yet. So let's open up the repository again, and I'm going to open up the distribution folder and then notes.html. This is the file that has all the markup for that notes screen. I'm going to copy this, come here, and I'm going to get rid of this. So the problem is we can't just paste all of our HTML here. If we do, it's going to break. And you can see right here, everything says JSX fragment has no corresponding closing tag. And actually that's not the problem. The main problem is that what I copied is essentially HTML and we need JSX. So I'm going to Google HTML to JSX, and I like to use this website, transform.tools. And in here, if you basically just paste your HTML, it's going to convert that HTML into JSX, and you can just copy this and use this in your project. So I'm going to paste this in, and I'm going to reindent. Okay, so if you take a look, it just works. And the reason the background is not working is if you go up over here, you can see that the body has a class that is not being applied. So you can manually just apply the background color by going into index.js, but instead of what I'm going to do is open up the public index.html and just paste the class right here. Okay, so now you can see everything is working perfectly. So it is rendering the HTML and CSS for our application. Okay, so now we're going to start by opening up the notes.js and creating a constructor. A constructor is going to call the super method, and it's going to pass in the props like so. Then it's going to set a state. So we can just say this.state and provide an object. And this object is going to have notes. This note is going to be an array of all the notes. So this is one node, this is the second node, this is the third node, fourth node. If this is the state of our application, we are going to need an array of 4 nodes. But we're just going to start by creating 2 nodes. So let's go ahead and create an object. And each node is going to have an ID, title, and a body. Then we can just duplicate the node and say my second node. Okay, so nothing's gonna happen yet, but if you come down here to where the nodes are, we can see that this is what gets repeated for each node. And I'm gonna get rid of all the nodes except the first one, and then I'm gonna loop over the nodes variable. The way to do that in JSX is to simply map over the array. So we're gonna say this state, and then it's called nodes. So we're gonna map over the nodes, and for each node we're gonna return this element. So you can save that and refresh the page. You can see that there's 2 nodes here, but as you can see, there's a problem that it's saying that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So we're gonna come up here and provide that key prop. So we know that each node has a unique ID, so we can just provide that, and that'll fix that error. Okay, so the next thing is we need this title and body to be the actual title and body of the node. So we can just replace this title by node.title and replace this text area by node.body. Okay, so if you save that, you can see that now it's working. Okay, so the next thing is to be able to filter the notes. How can we type something in here, and if it doesn't match the title or the body, it should get rid of that note from the list. So to do that, we're just gonna go ahead and first of all grab the value of this input, and we do that by creating a two-way data binding. So let's come up here, and we're gonna provide two values. I'm gonna say on change, it should run handle change method. I'm going to bind the context, so the handle change method that we define has the this variable, and consequently it has the state variable. But also I'm going to bind the value to this state, and then we're going to define a new variable called search query. So let's go ahead and define those two things. One is the state variable, which is called the search query, and the second one is the handle change method. So handle change, and this handle change is going to have event object, and we can simply set the state variable called search query to e target value. So this will essentially create a two-way data binding between this state variable and that input field. So if you refresh the page and type something in, nothing is happening. But if we open up the React Dev Tools, so this is something that I would recommend you get. If you Google React Dev Tools, you can just go ahead and install this Chrome extension, and that just basically gives you this helpful little tool. So when you open up if you open up this notes component and look at the states, you can see there are two state variables. One is the notes that we defined, and the second variable is the search query. That search query updates as we update the input. So at any point we can simply filter the list by what we type into the search box. So to do that, let's come down here, and where it maps over the list, let's before mapping over, let's run a filter, and this accepts a callback loop through each node, and for each node we will return true if node.title matches the state search query. Check this out. And so if you say my first node, it filters, but notice that it's not case sensitive. So if I type the small letter M instead of the capital letter, it doesn't work. So to fix that, what we're going to do is simply convert both of these to lowercase. Okay, so now it's going to work for both the uppercase and the lowercase. Finally, if you notice, it doesn't work for the first node. It doesn't work for the node body, because it's currently only trying to match the title. So to fix that, let's go ahead and define an OR statement here. So return true if the title matches, or I'm going to say if the body matches. Let's refresh the page, and you can see my first node body and my second node body. It still works. Perfect. So we now have the list, and we can filter that list. Now we need to be able to edit a node. So when we click this, I want to go to /nodes, and then the ID of the node, and then /edit. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of this anchor tag, I'm gonna replace that by a link tag, and I'm gonna get rid of this href, and instead it's going to /nodes, and then the ID of the node, and then edit. But if we refresh the page, it says link is not defined. So let's go ahead and import that at the top. React router DOM. And now we can click and go to that route. Alright, now that the routing is working, we need to add a new route to check for this endpoint and respond with a certain component. So I'm going to open up the app.js file and add a new route here called notes, and then ID, and then edit. And this component is going to be called edit node. So let's go up here and import that, edit note. But of course it doesn't exist yet, so let's open up the sidebar and add a new page here called edit note.js. And I'm going to generate that class again. And we will say edit note here. So you can see that it works, but now we need to copy the HTML. So let's go back to that repo, and then I'm going to open up the single note.html and copy everything. But again, this won't work unless it's converted to JSX, so we'll do that here again, and then copy and paste. Let's re-indent everything. And now if you refresh, you can see that it works. Okay, so for here, what we're gonna do is have 2 default values, and then we need 1, 2, and 3 handlers. So what happens when we click this, this, or this? All right, so let's first go ahead and define a state. So we need a constructor that we'll call a super, and we'll pass the props, and then I'm gonna set the state. So state, I'm gonna define a state here, and this will have title and the body, and then we're gonna have 2 handlers. So handle title change, and this will simply set the state and define the title to e target value. It's very similar to what we did for the search query in the notes component. So if you open up the notes.js file, you can see that we have a handler that does this, and we bind that, and we use that handler on the search query input. In a very similar way, we're going to use a handler for the title and the body. So let's copy that and paste that in. This will update the body, and we will call that handle body change. Okay, finally let's go ahead and apply these to the corresponding inputs. So this is your input for the note, and instead of using this default value, I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to set a value here to this state title, and on change we're gonna run handle title change, and we're gonna bind this, and we bind the current context because otherwise we won't have this dot set state available in our handler. Okay, so very similarly, I'm just gonna copy this and paste this for the text area. And I'm going to get rid of that default value from here as well. And instead of title, this is going to be bound to the body. So when it changes, it's going to run handle body change. Okay. So now if you open up the React Dev Tools and open up that component that we currently have opened up here, and if you open up, we change the title or the body, you can see that it changes. Perfect. So how it's going to work is when we land on this component, we will have a component did mount lifecycle method, and this will essentially make the API call to grab the node with the ID and the ID of what's in the URL. So how do we grab the ID? Well, we grab it using the props. So let's go back to app.js. When we pass the component like so, the React router simply passes the props down to the component. So we have the this.props.match. Let me open this up, .match.params, and then the ID, and this is the node ID. So we can save that. And now we know that we can make a call to grab this node ID, and then simply grab those values and set the title to some initial title value, and similarly set the body to some initial body value. Great. But of course we're gonna replace this comment later on and grab from a real API. But first I'm just gonna build everything statically. Okay, what's next? What happens when we click this delete node? Well, what should happen is it should make an API call to delete the node and then redirect them back to the previous page. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and create a handler here. I'm going to say handle delete, and this will accept an event, and we're just going to run event.prevent default to prevent any default behavior the browser might have when we click a button. After that, we're going to make an API call here. Again, make an API call to delete the node with the ID of, and then I'm just going to copy this right here. And again, we're going to replace this with an actual API call that we make by building a demo API, but that's coming later. First, we're just going to build everything statically like I'm doing right now. So how can we redirect back to another route when we're using React Router? Well, the way to do that is to use a component called redirect. So let me come down here and I'm going to import redirect from React Router DOM. And let's come down here and I'm going to show you how it works by simply, before returning all that HTML, I'm going to return a redirect to, and we don't need the closing tag, and we can say that it redirects back to the home page. So now if we refresh, you can see that it instantly redirects us back to the home page. But we can create a check here. So if we set this to false, you can see that that makes it a conditional redirect. So if we open this up, now it doesn't actually redirect us back. But if this value was set to true, it does. So what we can do is actually grab a state variable here. And this doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to go up here and define it in the state. So go back. Initially it's going to be set to false, but once we have that, once we do the delete and we make the API call, we can simply run the set state and set the go back to true. So now if we delete this, it'll redirect us back. We actually haven't set the handle delete to run when we click this delete node button. So I'm gonna open up, I'm gonna search for delete node and go up here for on this button, and I'm gonna set this on click. And when we click this button, I want to run handle delete. I'm gonna bind the current context. Okay, so let's refresh the page. And now when we click this, it redirects us back. And we want the same thing for the cancel. So let's open up cancel. And I'm going to set an on click here and set this dot handle cancel. And I'm going to bind the this keyword. And let's go ahead and define that up here. Handle cancel, prevent default, and then we will set the state to go back. Okay, now if we refresh the page and we click the cancel button, it goes back. Perfect. So we can go back, we can delete, and we need some way to handle the save method as well. So let's go to save, and I'm just going to do the same thing. On click, handle save, bind this. Let's define that before cancel. Handle save e.prevent default, and here we will make an API call to save the node with the ID of this props match params ID, and then we will set the state to go back like so. Okay, so when we click that save button, we will prevent the default behavior, make the API call, and set the state to go back. Alright, so we have everything in place for the edit node screen. So we have the handlers for all these buttons and the inputs. So also we can cancel. Also, so now we need the new note page. So it's gonna be exactly the same. So we're just gonna duplicate most of this. So I'm gonna create a new page called create node.js, and we're gonna copy everything from edit node to create node, except for the delete. We don't need the handle delete method. And instead of saving the node, create a new node. And of course we won't have some default values for the title and the body, and also we're not gonna have so I think that's it. So we have the handle title, body change, handle save, make an API call to create a new node. We can cancel and go back, and okay, so delete. We don't need the handle delete method in the create node page, and if you search for delete again, we don't need this button as well. Okay, so when we click this new node button, okay, so it's not set to redirect on the right page, of course, and also we don't have that route yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So this is on the nodes page, so nodes.js, and let's come down here, and I know this is the link, so I'm going to change that with a link tag, with a link component that will go to nodes create. Let's go ahead and, well, actually it's up here already, so if we click node, it takes us to nodes/create. Perfect. Okay, so now we can go back to app.js and define a new route here that takes us to nodes/create, and this will render a new component called create node, and let's import it up at the top. Okay, so it's already here. Let's go ahead and save that and refresh the page. Oh, create node. We need to update this to say create node. Oh, what's happening on line 84 here? Oh, so we have some duplication in our create node page. My bad. So let me refresh the page, and there is another problem. Let me get rid of that. Okay. So yeah, that should fix everything. Also, we don't need this component did mount here, so let's get rid of that. Let's refresh the page. Okay, so now everything is working. So we don't have that delete button, and we're not setting a default value for title and body. And we do have handlers for save. So this is what happens when you save. Instead of making an API call to save the node, we're gonna make an API call to create a new node. And I have that delete button, that delete handler. So I think everything is working fine. So also we can open up this edit node, and if you update the title and the body, you can see that the right fields are being updated. So I think now we're ready to go ahead and implement an API. So I'm going to close everything here and think about what we're going to do. So right now we don't have any sort of backend for our application. We're not using Express or some sort of PHP backend or anything like that. So what we're going to do is set up a demo API. And to do that, I'm going to use a package called JSON server. And you can get that by installing it using npm. So you can say npm install -g and then run JSON server to go ahead and install the JSON server on your computer. Once you do that, you need to create a new file, and I'm going to create it in the root of my project. It doesn't matter where you create it, but I'm just going to keep everything in here. It's going to be called db.json. And in here, we're going to define a notes property, and that is going to be an array, and it will have an ID and a title. I'm just going to say my first node, and it's going to have a body. So I'm going to say my first body, because we can save everything and then close this file. That's all we need to do. Because you have that JSON server installed, you can run this command, and you're going to say db.json, and we will specify the port to be 8080. So what that's going to do is set up in a RESTful API on this endpoint. So we can simply go ahead and open up localhost 8080 and then the endpoint, and that will just give me the note. And it has all the endpoints, so you can see the notes, you can see any particular note, and then if you run a patch or delete request, it can update or delete the particular note as well. Okay, so let's go back here, and now let's start implementing the API in our application. So the first page that we're going to implement is the notes.js. This is where all the notes are. So if you open up the home page, this is where all the notes are. Right now you can see that we're hard coding everything. So I'm just going to get rid of all the notes, and instead I'm gonna add a component lifecycle method, component.mount, and this will make an Axios request to that endpoint /notes. And remember, if we do that, we get this endpoint right here. Once we do that, we can just expect a response, and I'm just going to log everything to the console. But we don't have Axios installed, so also I'm going to open up a new tab and run npm install Axios, and then I'm going to import Axios at the top. Okay, so Axios is installed, and now if we refresh the page, okay, can't resolve Axios. Let me save everything. Hard refresh. Let me just go ahead and restart the server. Okay, so now it's working. So let me open up the console, and you can see that we get an array back with the list of all the notes. So all we have to do at this point is set our state and set the notes equal to the response.data. So what we get from the API. That will essentially render all the notes. So all the filtering will work, of course, but the difference here is we are actually getting all the results from db.json. So this page has the API. What about this one? So how do we implement the API on this page? Okay, so let's open up edit node.js, and in here, as soon as the component is mounted, we need to make an API call to grab the node with the ID of this ID. So to do that, let's make an Axios get request, and the endpoint is going to be nodes and then the ID of the node. So instead of using regular strings, I'm gonna switch to using template strings, and so we can use this syntax to add node ID here. Once we get the response, we can simply set the state to have this the title and the body. And similarly, for the handle save method, we will make an Axios request, and the request type is going to be patch, and you can of course check the endpoints out by looking at the documentation on the JSON server GitHub repo. But I'm just gonna show you how it works. So localhost 8000 nodes, and then the node ID. Node ID is props match params ID, and then response We will go back once we update the node, but we can't just make the request here and not provide our data. So we need to send in our title and the body with the request. So from our state, we're going to send the title and body to the RESTful API, and that will update the node. And then once we get back the response, we will simply redirect back. Okay, so let's refresh the page, and I'm just going to say title, body, and save. And you can see it works, it updated. And also now we need the ability to delete a node. So where's that delete node handler? There it is. Here we need to make an API call to do this. So Axios delete, let's make an API call, host 8080, and then the ID of the node, this props match params ID. And once we have the response, and just so you know, this means when we have a successful response, then we will redirect back. So when we click this delete node, that didn't work, and that's because we're using the wrong endpoint. Okay, so now we refresh the page. When we click this delete node, you can see that node is gone. Okay, so now we need to work on the create node page. So let's go back to create node.js, and then in here we need to make an API call to create a new node, and that happens using the post request. So HTTP localhost 8080, then nodes, and then we provide the data. So title is going to be this state title, and similarly the body is going to be this state body. And once we get the successful response, we will set the state and we will redirect. Axios is not defined. Let's import that at the top. Okay, let me say new title, new body, save, and it updates. It creates a new node, and when we open up the new node, we can update the title and the body, and it gets updated, and we can of course delete the node. Perfect.